Hey everyone, so I am sitting in the garden this evening and I thought it would be a fun video idea to put together a list of, well, not all of but all of the garden mistakes I've made that I can remember and wrote down in a list. And I want to do this for a few reasons. First is just to show that everybody makes mistakes and no one knows exactly what they're doing when they start something, especially if they're starting something for the first time. So I would say I really started gardening about 4 years ago. I had a few plants here and there before then, but 4 years ago is when I really started to put like an actual garden together, and I can't even tell you how many things I did 4 years ago that I laugh at now. So I thought it'd be fun to go over those. Also, I've been a person in the past where I've stopped myself from doing things because I thought I'd make a mistake, but then I never got to do those things anyway, which I'm pretty sure I would have enjoyed. So I want to encourage any of you out there who maybe you're just worried that you're not going to know exactly what you're doing, so you don't want to start, to just say, go ahead and start. And gardening is one of those things where you will learn so much so quickly. Like, I can't even understand how much knowledge I've gained in the last few years, but you're still always going to be learning. So I've learned so much. There's definitely much more to learn, and I thought it'd be fun today to go over some of the mistakes that I have made so far in gardening. Another reason I wanted to go over this list was because you can learn from other people's mistakes. So hopefully some of the stuff I go over here will prevent you from making those same mistakes and help you learn a little bit more along the way. So I have my list here, and I figure we'll just go ahead and jump into it. Also, definitely leave any of your mistakes down below. So the first one was not having any idea where the sun hit in my garden, and also not only where it hits in the garden, but knowing that the sun will change position throughout the year. I feel like that's something you know, but not until you're really gardening do you actually realize, oh, the sun's hitting this part of the deck in the summer, but it doesn't hit it at all in the spring, stops hitting it again in the fall, and kind of knowing for those changes. So if you're going to be creating like a permanent garden structure, I would say if you can, wait a full season, especially if it's in a space, maybe it's a new space that you're not familiar with, before you like put in anything that's going to be permanent. Now, I pretty much knew where my garden was going to be because we had a deck and that's where it was going to sit, but it was also good that I had everything in containers because, for example, I planted a tomato plant in the spot where it got the most amount of shade. Again, not really understanding where the sun was going to hit my deck, but luckily I was able to drag it into a new position. So I would say, one, watch your space just as you're getting ready to start gardening, and two, if you can wait a full season, I understand though you might not necessarily be able to, but if you can, don't put anything that's really permanent or any sort of large structure in there for at least a full season. And if you want to start with just containers in the first year, even if you do have a yard, I think that can be helpful, and kind of figure out what works best in what spot. Here, when we moved in, I'd already been gardening a couple years, but I did kind of get an idea of where the sun hit. So for example, the wall behind me over there is where it gets the most sun throughout the day. So I knew that anything that really loves full sun is going to want to go on that deck. Anything that needs a little bit more shade is going to go over there. So just getting to know your space in general. So my second mistake I made, which is going to be specific to container gardeners, is not understanding that container size mattered. I thought I could put any plant in any size container and it would grow just fine. But when I put an indeterminate tomato, which I didn't know at the time what that meant, into a pot that was, I think, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter, and it barely grew, and it kept tipping over, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I should look up the best container size for tomatoes, and I think it was like 10 to 15 gallons, and what they're growing in now, I have 2 in a 30-gallon grow bag. So I've learned since then that anytime I get a plant, I need to go online and see which container size works the best for it. I will say, in general, I've found that 5 to 10 gallon containers work for the most part for my plants, but there are some that definitely need a lot more space than others. So look that up before you plant, just to be sure. And you'll probably find a range, but if you can get like somewhere around what's recommended, you'll be a lot better off than trying to grow a giant plant in a very teeny tiny pot. Another mistake I made, and this is a mistake I made with plants in general, both indoors and outdoors, was overwatering. I remember, and obviously this was a fake memory, but I swear when I was a child, we watered our houseplants every day. My mom disagrees, but I just assumed that when you have a plant, like let's say you have a pet, you need to give it water every day. So I did that, both with my houseplants, and I didn't understand why they died or how I killed a cactus. And then the first time I started gardening, I didn't even think to check the soil. I would just come out and water the plant. And I quickly realized that that was actually killing my plants, and that was something I didn't even know, that like too much water or too much sun can actually hurt a plant. I thought the more of each, the better. And that's definitely not true. So now what I do, well, kind of two different things. If it's something that I'm growing for the first time, or it's in a container that I really haven't planted anything in before, I will always check the moisture level before watering. Now that I know my plants a little bit better, I know that some need more or less water. For example, anything that I'm growing that's larger of a plant in a smaller pot, that's obviously going to need more water. Anything in my larger containers that aren't as porous, it's going to need water less often. Some plants I only water once a week, some need it once a day, some need it twice a day, and that's just something you'll learn as time goes on. But if you're just getting started, I would say don't set a hard rule as far as how much you water. Check the moisture in the soil and then go ahead and water if it's dry, you know, down to about your first or second knuckle on your finger. So even though I still have a drip system, pretty much everything that's set up to that, I know it can get watered every day or that it needs to, but there are some days that I will turn it off if I check the soil and it doesn't need it. So even when I have those automatic systems in place, I still check my soil to see if it actually needs any additional moisture. Another thing that really just took me until this year to stop doing was not staking anything. Now at first I didn't know anything needed to be staked. That was the same thing that happened with my tomato that I was growing. It started getting large and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then I realized tomato cages were a thing. And some other things I have, like my sunflowers or my dahlias, I didn't stake those, and I ended up having to kind of find a solution at the last minute when we had a windy night and I was staring at my garden through the window hoping things wouldn't break. So getting that structural element in place when I plant the things I know are going to need staking has been incredibly helpful. So I would recommend that, not only to make sure that your plant doesn't break, but it will just give you a little bit less stress knowing that your plants are going to be well taken care of. Another mistake I made was planting the wrong things together. Now I would say for the most part in my garden, except for the raised bed, it's pretty much one plant per pot. But I did realize certain things like mint, if you plant them in a raised bed, will take over everything. So that's when I started to understand that you can't just put whatever you want wherever. Some things do need a certain type of environment. So some things spread really easily and take over. Always look at the size of the things to know how large you're gonna get. I made the mistake last year with marigolds that I'd only seen marigolds that were only a few inches tall. I didn't know giant marigolds existed, even though the packet said they were gigantic, and I planted them next to a pepper plant and they very quickly overtook the pepper plant. So make sure that you know the full size of the plants that you're going to be planting. Know if they spread aggressively and if you need to keep them contained or away from other plants. It's really easy to look up things that do like to be planted together. So companion planting is something that I've been getting more into, just seeing kind of what works well together and what doesn't. I do though still throw random plants in some places, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So my asters, I think I had a few last year that I tried to put in the bed with the zinnias. They didn't really do well because there just wasn't enough space. So I knew I needed to put those in a different place for this year. So you'll get, again, more familiar with your plants over time, but it is definitely worth looking up, especially if you are planting things together in a smaller contained area, that you're gonna be able to give all of the plants in there the room that they need to grow. Another mistake I made is buying things because they looked pretty, but they weren't necessarily good quality. So especially at the beginning when I didn't really understand like different types of gardening brands, I would just buy things like this, which were tools I think I found on Amazon that are this really pretty flower print. And I mean, I've used them. The only thing is that anytime I try to dig through something that is even a little bit tough to dig through, that's not like very soft soil, this would break off. Now I think I got a set of maybe 4 or 5 tools for $30, which you can get one tool for $30, so that was a good deal and they were pretty, but I've had to super glue this a few times and a few of my other ones as well. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes things are worth the investment to get something that's a little bit more high quality, especially if it's something that you're going to be using quite frequently. However, I will say on the flip side, expensive isn't always better. So I grow things in grow bags that are super cheap, just as well as I grow things in ceramic containers that are more expensive. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I would say if there's anything that you're going to be using a lot, try to go for something that is at least good quality. The next mistake I made is something I feel like happens to a lot of people, and that's when you start gardening, you want to plant everything that you can get your hands on. So anytime we would go to a store, I would grab more seeds, I'd grab more plants, I'd plant them, I would run out of room, it would require lots of maintenance to keep track of everything, and I realized I was spending time and effort taking care of plants that I didn't really like. And this includes both vegetables that I didn't really eat and flowers that just didn't make me as happy as other types of flowers, because I just wanted to try everything. And I learned a lot from it, but I did start to realize over time that for me, because I have limited space, limited time, I'm sure as we all do, I want to make sure that I'm spending my time and my space in my garden on things that I truly, truly love. Now again, I wouldn't know what I love until I tried it out, so definitely experiment, but I would say, especially for vegetables, if you know that you don't eat, for example, cucumbers that regularly, which I don't, you don't have to get a cucumber plant. So you can get one from the store once a year when you actually need it for a recipe. But I was grabbing things left and right just because I thought it was fun, and it was fun. But then you will learn over time kind of what makes sense for you in your garden. So I would say if you know you don't like something or you're not going to eat it, and you have limited space, go for the things that you know you're going to love in your garden. And the last mistake that I have on this list, even though again I'm sure there's a lot more, was being too afraid to experiment or try things out, and also caring too much about what other people said. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it's really important to get advice from other people, especially people that have been gardening for a long time. But I was trying sometimes so hard to listen to everybody's advice, and a lot of the advice sometimes conflicts, that I would just kind of freeze up and not do anything because it was so confusing. So I just had to go out on my own and try it. If it worked, great. If it didn't work, I learned something. So for example, in my garden, I space everything pretty much too close together because I want to make sure that I have it in my garden and I want it here. And so far, for the most part, that hasn't really failed as much as it succeeded. So for me, that's something that works out really well, even though it's something that goes against like a best practice or what somebody would recommend. So I think that's everything I have on my list. I know there are a ton more mistakes that I haven't remembered, and I will still continue to make a lot more mistakes, and will easily be able to make parts 2, 3, 10 of this video. But if you have any mistakes as well, please feel free to leave them down in the comments below. For me, it's incredibly helpful just to know that other people make mistakes, because I feel like a lot of the time, especially on social media, everything looks so perfect. Like everyone's garden is green and lush and there's no pests and nothing dies, even though it actually does, because that happens to everybody, but it's not necessarily what you see. So sometimes I know for me it would make me feel like, well, what am I doing wrong that nothing is going wrong in their gardens, but it feels like everything's going wrong in mine sometimes. But know that everyone makes mistakes. It's a learning process, and the learning process is actually really fun. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.